we need a very short insert about women sending dick pics to the guy's mother. Welcome to In Bits, the podcast that deconstructs our digital lives. I'm Nicola.
And I'm Liam.
And we are both lecturers in IADT, in cyberpsychology and applied psychology.
So, Nicola, what do you... I know the answer to this. What do you continue to be in bits about for your entire research career?
Always in bits about online dating. And this week in particular, and I'm sure lots of online daters are in bits about it as well, we're going to talk about all the negative stuff, all the harassment, all the dick pics, all the racism, everything like that. It's going to be so much fun. So yeah, this is the second episode because I cannot stop talking about online dating.
So we talked about a lot in the first episode. All generally positive. So we spoke about some of the different reasons people date online, seeking relationships, sex, fun, entertainment, a sense of community. So we chatted about that in relation to the LGBT community research and when traveling or kind of making new friendships. So not just solely dating. Self-exploration, ego validation, so physical attractiveness, our kind of sense of self and our personality, self-esteem, all of that, which was actually positive. And also just curiosity in other people. We also talk about some of the more kind of difficult issues to comprehend. So things like deception, catfishing, which I think is amazing. So if you missed that, please go back. And various different kind of conversations around images, who is in particular images, vagueness in profiles, everything from a more positive slant. So this week we're going to go a little bit, I'm not going to say darker, a little bit more negative.
We're going to go super dark.
Super dark. Okay, fine.
I'm just about to do the content warnings.
Okay, good. Okay, far away.
We're going to talk about harassment. We're going to talk about sexual harassment, image-based sexual abuse, so why men send dick pics. We're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about disabled people's experiences online. So, yeah.
Okay,
be
so
careful.
We're going to be dark.
yeah.
Okay, I apologize.
Please check the show notes. We will put some mental health resources in there if this is difficult for you, or if you feel this just isn't the episode for you to listen to today, please feel free to skip it. So we started looking at the research from the Pew Internet Research Institute last week, and we started looking at the graph on negative experiences. We kind of looked at the overall experience of positive and negative outlooks on online dating. And this is from 2023, and it's from America, which is kind of similar to everywhere that's like Western
focus research.
Yeah. We don't have a ton of research from other places to compare it to, but it should be similar-ish to Western countries. So it's generally positive, like 53% versus 46%, so not overwhelmingly. And we talked about that a little bit last week. But 11% of people have very, very negative experiences. And there are some differences in the kinds of people who have better or worse experiences. So yeah, more wealthy and educated daters also have more positive experiences, which is unsurprising, really. But the most negative experiences are from women, particularly younger women, and also the LGBT members of this survey experienced most of the harassment and negative things, even though they reported a more overall general positive kind of experience.
Okay.
So what kind of things are they experiencing? So I'm showing Liam a graph from...
I love a good graph.
I love a good graph. And this one's got lots of detail on it. It's good. So this is from that report, and it's about receiving unsolicited, sexually explicit messages or images on dating sites, apps. Also about people continuously contacting you after you've said you're not interested, being called offensive names, and being threatened with physical harm. And it's looking at the breakdown of overall who's experienced this. So like being sent sexually explicit images, unsolicited, overall 38% of people had experienced this. Had someone continue contact is 30%, being called offensive names 24%, and being threatened with physical harm 6%. But when you look at the numbers and you break it down into groups, women 18 to 49, 56% of them had been sent unsolicited graphic images.
It's only 25% for men. It's less than half.
Yeah.
Okay.
43% of women had someone continue to contact them after said they weren't interested. And for men the same age, it's 21%. So it's pretty much double. Being called offensive names, 37% of women, only 19% of men. And threatened with physical harm, 11% of women. Like, that's quite serious kind of harassment and threats.
And 4% of men.
4% of men, yeah. So the numbers for women overall are nearly double that of men in pretty much all the age groups. And then if you look at the LGBT community, you've got 56% have been sent explicit images that they didn't ask for, 42% continuous contact after saying they weren't interested, 33% called offensive names, and 7% threatened with physical harm. So also pretty negative experiences. So yeah, and like Black and Hispanic people have worse experiences than white people, particularly around being sent sexually explicit messages or images. It's pretty bad. Like people are experiencing a lot of negative stuff that they do not want and have not asked for at all.
What stands out to me is obviously the perpetrator trend being probably men, or most likely men, and then the double. I keep going back to the 56% being sent sexually explicit images, and that being the same in the LGBT community that they didn't want to receive. And then you compare that to the numbers for men who reported not, that 75% of men who had received them were comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an image that they didn't ask for. So what's interesting about the research about like sending dick pics is that, and for women sending these images, women generally don't. Like, of course, there are some that send unsolicited graphic images, but it's actually quite rare. Men are much more likely to send them. The recent research I saw on this showed that women are almost universally disgusted by or annoyed by or made angry by receiving unsolicited dick pics, whereas gay and bisexual men are almost universally positive or neutral about it. Now, there are exceptions. Again, within that, there are a vanishingly small number of women who are excited to receive them and really like them and find it flattering. And there's a number of gay men and bisexual men who don't like receiving them. But it's quite a difference. And it may just be that like men perceive these things differently. And so men think like, if women sent me a graphic image, I'd be really excited by it and it'd be great. So they must feel the same if I send them one. So, yeah, not great experiences overall. So after talking about dick pics, let's talk about why men send them. This is one of the top questions that I get when people know that I talk about online dating research. They're sort of like, yeah, online dating is fine, but like, why do men send so many dick pics? Because it's not just somewhere like online dating. In some ways, at least it's kind of relevant. Like you're looking for a relationship that's romantic and maybe sexual. So in some ways, contextually, it's sort of relevant, even though it's not, and it's image-based sexual harassment. But if you're on Facebook Marketplace or LinkedIn, you do not expect to get dick pics. And women get dick pics everywhere. Everywhere. There's nowhere that's safe. They get them everywhere. It's quite incredible that men think it's appropriate.
I'm just trying to think of I'm like, yeah, you're scrolling through your LinkedIn, you're checking your messages on the Lewis, and you're like, oh, okay, great, penis.
Yeah. I mean, men slide into women's DMs all the time on LinkedIn. It's like, it's a professional platform, but there is nowhere that is safe.
Okay. Yeah.
So why do they send them? What's fascinating is there's a number of pieces of research now on this, and they've found very, very similar results. Some slightly different results, but mostly very similar. The number one is that it's a transactional mindset. They are sending them in the hope of getting either pictures or a hookup in return. And they expect that might happen, which is fascinating to me. Okay. They're hoping to attract a mate, to show interest, to turn somebody on. They think that the person who receives these, or they expect that the person who receives these will be actually turned on by getting these images.
But because they're aroused by engaging in that behavior?
Some of them are. So about 25% of them are. They're like proud and they get sexual excitement from sending them, but not all of them do. Like
it's almost like a digital flasher.
Yeah, well, that's a little different again. So about 10% are like a digital flasher, which is more about control. That's about power and control, because flashing isn't actually sexual, really. It comes out in a sexual way, but it's about power and control. Yeah. It's about controlling someone's emotions, their fear, their disgust, their shame. And that's what about 10% of people who send dick pics are doing. The others genuinely think that women are going to be excited about it, because if they got an image themselves, they would be. And what's really interesting is that men just do not listen to women. So one of the pieces of research was talking to young men and women. So they were 17 to 21. And they asked the guys, why do you send them? And they were pretty much all these same reasons. They asked the women, what do you think about receiving them? And some of them did say, like, it was kind of like a symbol of popularity. Like it indicated that they were popular. They
Because
didn't
they
love the
received so
images,
many.
but they received them, and it was like a kind of like a
kudos.
compliment. Yeah,
Okay.
like a kudos. And the men were sometimes sending them as compliments. But most of the women were just completely disgusted by them, particularly when it was happening within a friend group and they had to pretend like it was a joke, even though they knew it wasn't a joke, and they had to laugh along with it from someone they knew. Yeah. Really didn't like it, were disgusted, couldn't understand why guys did this. So they went back to the guys. It was a qualitative piece of research. So they were interviewing them and they said, look, the girls were saying this, the young women were saying this. They were really disgusted to receive them, makes them angry, they don't like it. What's your response to that? And they said, well, they have to say that. They'll be slut shamed if they say they like it, but they really like it.
Oh, God.
So they can hear. They can also be aware that there is a double standard in society around slut shaming and women liking sex. And at the same time, they can't put those two things together and come up with something that's actually true.
It's gaslighting.
Yeah.
But
Well,
like, I get
it fits what they want. They've created a story that fits what they want.
I get that it's their entire framework, but it's at the same time, if you don't receive, or like there will be some people who receive it like a dick pic and like they're like, oh great, thanks, cheers, and there's other people who are going to be like, what the fuck, why are you sending this to me? It's just inappropriate, please stop. And then you get to the whole other level where they're in your friend group that's so much more intrusive, or they're a friend of a friend, even like one removed, and that's it's like it borders on like intimidatory kind of predatory based behavior. And it's not saying that someone who sent a dick pic is some form of predator, but it's just, I wouldn't like to know that one of my close friends had received a dick pic from someone else who they regularly see, and there's that kind of tension or intimidatory behavior that's happening in that space. It would make me feel uncomfortable knowing that that's happened, let alone the person who's received it. And then the person who sent it, I need more time than we have.
Like at the minimum, it just shows the lowest level of emotional intelligence to think that that's going to be well received. And at the worst, it is that power manipulation. I think it's really not great.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of men think women will be excited about it. They are excited about themselves. There's that smaller group that are power and control. Some of them, it's misogyny. They dislike women, and particularly feminists, and they're sending the pictures to punish them. That's about 6%.
Okay.
So there's a multitude of reasons, but the primary ones are they think it will be well received and that they might get something else in return, which I think is quite interesting. When I looked at the questions that they asked, so like the transactional mindset is, I've sent dick pics hoping that the person will want to have sex with me. And I've sent dick pics hoping to receive sexy pictures in return. That was 44% of people who answered yes to that. So, like, it's quite interesting that they're not listening
and
to
it's
women.
not a small sample of participants. Like, it's big. There's 523 participants in this study.
Yeah, this is just one of the studies. The others have found very similar things.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an issue.
Wait, no, don't. She's scrolling through the questions and I'm like, no. I thrive on personal feedback about my penis. Right, okay. So like sexual and personal gratification, power and control.
That's basically like flashing.
I think it's funny to send a pic to someone who doesn't request one. And that's, 12%.
I like to make people angry by sending them in response to a disagreement. Like
that's a really it's not. It's like a border between threat of violence, but also it's
juvenile.
I'm trying to like understand the behavior, where it comes from, even outside of the question.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
that's why you're hearing me go, oh, yeah, a bit. Yeah, sorry.
It's very controlling.
Yeah,
because it takes away whatever the disagreement or the conversation was about and makes it about something crude and explicit and threatening. One of the things that did come from this study was that men who are higher in narcissism and benevolent and hostile sexism are much more likely to send dick pics. They were able to predict it with like 66% of the variance accounted for with those three variables. So narcissism is obviously everything's all about themselves. So they're not thinking about what other people want. They're only thinking about themselves. And then benevolent sexism is the kind of sexism where you think women are weak and men need to help them. So it's not hostile.
Counter-tatism.
Yeah. Hostile is I hate women. I hate feminists. They're not equal to men. And so that predicted it. So it's not surprising to see some of that hostility in here and that misogyny in here in particular, I think.
But it's inappropriate to send an image to someone like an irrelevant image. I don't mean like an unsolicited dick pic. I mean, it's not really like if one of my friends was to message me on LinkedIn with a social line of chat, it's inappropriate for the purpose of the app.
Yeah.
Never mind it being an unsolicited image that you shouldn't have been sending in the first place.
Yeah. But even if you think about like within a relationship, like if your partner's at work and you just send them a dick pic, like that's not also appropriate. Like,
I don't know any couples that really behave that way though.
Exactly. Because I think like they are appropriate when it's consensual, when you're in a space, a headspace where you're in the mood for that kind of thing. It can be part of sexting. That's absolutely fine. But when you're not in that mood, it's jarring. It comes out of nowhere. You're not in a space to receive that kind of image and get the kind of response that the person wants to it. And I think for most people, that would be very jarring.
I just go to worst case scenario and you're like in a meeting and you open your WhatsApp from anyone, let alone your significant other, and that appears on your phone.
Yeah, I know.
I just, black hole swallow. Yeah,
I know. And then you think about something like Snapchat, where young teenage girls who don't have their profiles locked down, that's the predominant place that they get sent dick pics.
But people think Snapchat is like a safe space because it's that ephemeral, you send an image, it's deleted, and it's like we forget how technology works, and something is sent through a server and stored on a server before anything happens, let alone like if we ignore the legal piece behind that. People have this assumption that it's a safe space and a safe place in which to sext with it, which it absolutely is not.
Yeah. But also, because it's ephemeral, people are less concerned with how others might think of them because it's going to disappear as well. And so they do stuff in a more uninhibited way than they would in other spaces.
We did a piece of research a number of years ago which looked at how people were using apps and subverting safety features, and it was 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds that were saying or behaving in an unsecure way, so basically giving out their Snapchat details ahead of time. 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds knowing the kind of behavior that they were going to receive. Like, it was quite a small sample, but it was still they had an awareness of the safety features but still subverted them because they thought that they would be less likely to experience negative behavior.
Well, we all have a bias, an optimism bias, where we think we're less likely to be the victim of negative behavior and we're more likely to experience positive things.
But I think working in our field, in our space, I have the opposite of that. I assume that everyone is targeting me. This like tinfoil hat. Like I receive an email and I'm like, oh, it's fraudulent. It's
until
really
proved otherwise. Guilty until proven innocent.
Right, we're deviating a
little bit.
Okay.
But I think what's interesting is that a lot of young women in particular view receiving dick pics as just part of the price of being online. They don't even see it as image-based sexual abuse or harassment. They're just like, that's what happens when you're online. And I think that's a terrible place to be in.
It's like they've resigned themselves to that fate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do women react to this? We do have quite a bit of research on this as well. So women of all sexual identities have experienced this. It's not just straight women who've gotten dick pics, and they primarily have negative responses. So only a very minority select positive or neutral or ambivalent responses.
But can I interrupt you? Sorry.
Yes.
So women who receive, I promise I won't do that too much, LGBT women receiving unsolicited dick pics, they haven't been in a conversation with a straight male that is of a sexual nature or a dating nature or a purpose or intent. It's just, here's a penis.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, just needed to
I mean,
clarify that.
do know that bisexual and lesbian women also get a lot of approaches from couples and men on dating apps to be a third. So there's that over-sexualization as well of women who are lesbian or bisexual.
But it's just, it's like the out of context, part that's like, here you go.
Yep.
No, okay, right.
So women are more likely to be negative, and younger women are more negative in their responses than older women. And like I said, men and gay and bisexual men responded positively. Very few were actually negative about it, which I think is quite interesting. So the way that women respond to these images is really interesting. So they respond in a variety of different ways. So the ones who like them, which is not that many, can flirt back, feel appreciated. The ones who don't like them often feel very disgusted and violated. They might feel fearful, depending on how that experience has happened. But most of them, like I said, have negative reactions. And the most common reactions are being grossed out and feeling disrespected, as well as annoyance, anger, disgust, and fear. So the kind of things that they do in response to it, obviously they'll either block or ignore the sender a lot of the time. Sometimes they'll publicly shame them. So they'll share with other people that they've got it.
Sharing of someone else's image without consent, even if they have shared it with you, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, no, it's not okay, actually. It's actually illegal.
Yeah, but I think
I get the reasoning behind it.
I get the reasoning behind it, but it doesn't actually shame that person. If they're sending it out to everyone else, the likelihood is that they'll share that with someone else. It's this public name and shame aspect to it, which actually relates back to why sometimes men do it to women for the feminist ideals that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, so they sometimes do that. They will sometimes engage in anti-sexist humor to feel a sense of control over the interaction. I have heard stories online, like I obviously follow a lot of accounts that talk about this kind of stuff. And I've heard stories of women who find pictures of dicks online and send them back to men who send them dick pics and just keep sending more and going, oh, I thought you liked these. Don't you like these? Like, you sent me one. I thought this was a game.
Oh my God.
Which I think is
This is like
genius.
a troll the trolls kind of scenario, yeah.
And other women have sent them to, they've found out who the person's mother is and sent them to their mother and said, is this the kind of son that you raised? Which is interesting. And I understand why women do that when they've received a lot of dick pics, maybe. I mean, whether or not that's appropriate is another conversation. Again, that sharing of somebody's images without consent is a problem. But I do understand why they do it. So it is quite funny that women would send it to guys' mothers, but I also feel like that's also problematically gendered, that like, why would they not send it to their fathers? And why do we put the responsibility on women for their son's behaviour and reactions to their son's behaviour?
Because they think the mother is actually going to do something about it, as opposed to the father not potentially doing anything about it.
I know. And like, where are these guys learning this shit? So it's probably not from their mother. Yeah.
I don't think they're learning how to send dick pics from their dads though either.
A lot of negative behaviour. There is social learning involved.
But not like from a generational perspective. I don't think like our parents are not in online dating.
Yeah, they're not specifically learning to do it in online dating. Plenty of older men send dick pics to women, and particularly to younger women. So I'm not saying it's not happening. It's
a
just
lot
less
of
likely.
the stories I get when I ask people about their negative experiences with online dating, it's the unsolicited dick pic, but it's also being requested to send these images or like have video sexting calls and stuff like that. So not surprised.
No. All of them in this particular study, two studies, perceived it as a form of harassment. There was another study looking at Snapchat, particularly with much younger teenage girls who didn't see it. A lot of them didn't see it even as a form of harassment. It was just the price they paid for being online, which is kind of damning.
I know there was research here in Ireland that looked at how people share the sexting amongst adolescents and when and how they share images. The majority of the time they were being asked to share an image by a significant other, and the majority of the time they reported, at least in self-report, that they were not sharing that image and that they didn't feel threatened to do so. If they received the unsolicited images, they tended to just block the person.
Yeah.
So we have these like online safety aspects from a child's perspective or an adolescent's perspective. I think adults and adult behaviour in response to this, there's a lot more resilience in it than outside of just blocking. There's a bit of like punishment and the troll that we've kind of touched on.
And there's a fair bit of humour involved in how women respond to this stuff as well.
It's exasperation.
Yeah.
Like they're just,
And to get some control over it, to feel like you're making the other person smaller. Because they're... You know, there is a perception that most men who do this are trying to get a sense of control over women. It actually doesn't appear to be the case for most men, but you can understand why women would want to get back control when they've experienced this, particularly repetitively. Like, some women are more likely to experience it, younger women in particular. And I think some platforms are getting better at identifying them. I mean, we know that Instagram can identify a female nipple within about 2 seconds of it being posted and can identify correctly whether it is a male or a female nipple within about 2 seconds. So I'm not sure why these platforms aren't better at identifying dick pics, because you would imagine that the same sort of rules of like flesh coloredness, etc., in the algorithm would apply.
In a DM though.
Yeah, it's harder. I mean, some platforms will do it and they'll blur it out and say, do you want to actually look at this? I've seen that before.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So what about other minority groups' experiences? So aside from just talking about women and these kind of experiences. So people with disabilities have quite mixed experiences online dating. So it can be really beneficial. So there's other research that's found that for people with disabilities, the fact that they're online means that they have some control over when to disclose their disability if it's not immediately visual or immediately obvious visually. And that can be useful because they can let people get to know them before they disclose it. It's a tricky thing to do, and it's quite difficult, and it comes with its own issues. But it does allow some benefits. And they do find dating to be beneficial because they can meet other people and expand their dating pool. But it also recreates a lot of the very normative ideas of ableism and sexuality and gender in disabled people that are found offline. So the idea that so many people view disabled people as being asexual and, wouldn't be interested in sexual relationships and so on. So that kind of replication of those problems online is quite annoying and quite problematic. For the LGBTQAI plus community, they often find that there's just a lack of options nearby. So like obviously you're trying online dating to expand your dating pool, but there may still not be very many people nearby.
Especially if you're in a rural area.
Exactly, yeah. And like not everyone is willing to do long distance or to commute a long way to meet somebody. It just doesn't really work for them. They also can experience a lot of exclusion, particularly trans people experience a lot of exclusion. They can experience a lot of objectification, women in particular. So bisexual and lesbian women can experience a lot of objectification. So they tend to get a lot of experiences with men or couples trying to recruit them as a third or to send them images, to pretend they're a woman, send them images and stuff. So there's a huge problem with that. But gay men also experience objectification as well. So there's issues with that in general.
But there's a lot of racism. I even remember from when I was like online dating, on profiles, people would say like the phrasing was no blacks, no femmes. Like racial diversity was just not, like they were just very much isolating. And these now in kind of more kind of recent times, they're like super red flags on someone's dating profile. It's like, I'm a racist right-wing bigot.
And with the dating sites cracking down on some of that language, they've gotten into more implicit ways of saying it.
Okay.
Yeah. Things like no curries.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
delightful.
really gross. Yeah.
It's kind of like someone saying they're looking for someone who like looks after themselves or is healthier lifestyle.
That means skinny or fit or ripped, depending on who you're talking to. Yeah.
I've never heard the no curries thing before. That's kind of sad.
That was one that I saw in an article about American gay daters. And they were, I can't remember the other euphemisms, but there were a few that kind of indicated
people are lovely.
They are delightful.
Yeah. Sorry, I completely interrupted you.
You got ahead. We're going to talk about racism in a sec.
Okay, so
well, actually, I might as well talk about it now, and then I'll come back to the other bit. Racism and prejudice is super common for a lot of people, and it can be very explicit. Like you said, like it's still very explicit. Explicit racism against Chinese daters rose during COVID in Australia in particular, where they just really explicitly said, like, no Asians. That's it. No kind of hiding it at all. It can be coded, like we just said, or implicit, where you just don't get a reply back, you don't get matched with, or someone ghosts you more often. There can also be quite a lot of fetishization of people of colour and inappropriate comments, like black women in particular. There's quite a bit of research on this, offline and online, but real like hypersexualization, that idea of like, you know, the jungle, the primal woman and stuff that's just horrific, or that they're aggressive, that they're like dominatrix, that kind of thing. Black women get that kind of stuff a lot. And there's also very preconceived notions of who they should be because they're black. Like, you're not ghetto enough, you're not this enough. So they can experience quite a lot of that.
I'm just kind of speechless, to be honest. I have no response to that.
I know. You'd like to think people were doing better, but yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
What can also happen to the LGBTQAI plus community is being outed or blackmailed, stalked, harassed, arrested, or hate crimes. So depending on where they are, if they're somewhere where it's like illegal or not acceptable to be queer, then this can be hugely, hugely problematic. So some people go onto these sites specifically to try and blackmail people or to out people. You get, in some jurisdictions, you get the police going onto the sites to try and find people so that they can arrest them. And you get people specifically trying to match with people to commit hate crimes against them. Like here in Ireland, over in the West Coast, we had some crimes that were committed against gay men where 2 men were murdered and they had met through dating sites. That's exactly what I was thinking about. Yeah. Absolutely horrific. So there is an inherent risk in meeting people that you don't know when you're part of a community that is the target of hate crimes specifically. Yeah, I told you it was going to get dark.
Yeah, see, this is why you have to always tell someone when you're going for a date, where you were going.
Yeah,
I always
exactly.
had rules with my mates where you would say, going out for a date, this is where we're going, talk to you in a couple of hours. And if you don't hear from me, like it's this hyper cautious fear of like genuinely of the unknown.
Yeah.
But I think it's just kind of like safe dating practices.
It is, yeah. And I think like gay men and women have a lot in common in that, right? You'd be equally as worried about your safety probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas I think straight men don't have that same fear necessarily. To a degree, but...
I would never, when I was dating online, I would never tell anyone where I lived. I would never give out any sensitive information. It was almost like it was like a cybersecurity test.
Yeah. So why are people dicks? Why
are people dicks, or why do they send dicks?
Well, we talked about why they send dicks. We're talking about why they are dicks now.
Okay.
We are going to get into this. So we're doing 2 episodes because I fucking can't stop yapping. So we're doing 2 episodes on trolling and toxic behavior online. They're coming soon. So I'm only going to briefly talk about this here, and I'm going to get into it in much more detail in those episodes. But briefly, why people do this. So there's something called the online disinhibition effect. And that is basically characteristics of the online environment along with people's individual differences, their personality traits and their individual attributes that lead them to act out in ways that are more frequent or much more intense than they might offline. Now, this can be positive. We will talk about that, but it can also be very toxic. And toxic disinhibition results in a lot of the negative toxic behavior you see online. So the kind of aggression, harassment, negative and harmful behaviors that we see, which happens in so many spaces, there are very few that are immune to it online. And there's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of factors involved in online disinhibition. So first of all, you have access to people in a way that you might not do offline. The social norms are really important. So basically, what is normal behavior within this environment? And if it is kind of toxic, you're more likely to do that too. What is the context? If it's a context that's a bit more kind of controversial, or there's an in-group, out-group, then you can get more of this toxic behavior. Anonymity sometimes plays a part, but not always. It can lead people to feel like their online actions aren't connected to their offline actions, and so they don't feel as responsible for them, but not always. Invisibility is a huge part of it. You can't see the other person. You can't see their reactions when you do something harmful, and they can't see you. And that plays a huge part of it. But there are also individual differences that make people more likely to do it than others. It's not that we're all as likely to do this as other people. And personality is responsible for a lot of toxic online behavior. Not all of it, but a lot of it. There's the dark tetrad of personality traits. And I am definitely going to get into these in a lot more detail. But they are psychopathy, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and everyday sadism. And they basically involve like a lack of empathy, a lack of caring about what you're doing to other people, manipulation of other people, enjoying inflicting cruelty on other people. So you can kind of see why they might be responsible for the toxic online behavior. And then also things like impulsiveness, short-temperedness, higher aggression make people more likely to kind of lash out and say things that they might not offline.
So the disinhibition aspect, it applies also in a dating scenario. So there's a story I got sent, and it's about, I've titled it Chivalry is Dead. The story says, I went on a date recently in town with a guy. We had dinner. I didn't really feel the spark afterwards. So I texted him to say, thank you so much for dinner. I appreciate it because you paid, and I don't really see us seeing each other again. So this obviously happening through technology. He responded, he sent a photograph of the receipt and was like, no problem, but like transfer me your part of the bill for the food there, will you? So I think there's no way he would have done that if that was face to face. I think he would have just been like, no, it's grand, don't worry, it's fine, I get this. Whereas like through phone, he's just like,
because it kind of breaks that social, like he's already paid for it and offered to pay, and now he's taking it back. That breaks that kind of social norm and social contract of politeness, doesn't it?
He's a bitter Betty.
God, it's so rude, but it just shows like people's expectations can vary a lot. Like a lot of women insist on paying, like I always insisted on paying for my half for the first date unless I knew I was going to meet somebody for a second date because I didn't want any obligation. And some guys really feel like if they pay for stuff that there's an obligation for you to give something back in return.
Well, not every woman is a prostitute.
Yeah.
Or a sex worker. Like that's not the real world.
Yeah. And some guys get really mad when their expectations aren't met.
So the expectations, I have an expectation story. So this person says, I was chatting to a guy on and off for about a month on Hinge. We organised a date, went for a walk on Killiney Hill. We got back to his car with a coffee because it was cold outside, and we were chatting normally. And he said, like, yeah, so when are we going to have sex or what's happening? And they said in response, I was like, well, what the fuck? I don't even know you, for fuck's sake. And he was like, yeah, but like nobody really goes for walks these days. Like I thought we were meeting up to have sex. And she says, I basically said no. And he was like, all right, then we'll get out of my car. Thanks for wasting my time.
Fuck. Jesus Christ.
So it reminds me of that the really old, very stereotypical book, like Women Are From Mars, or Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Very problematic book, by the way.
Yeah.
Have a look at the Books Could Kill episode in that one.
Yeah, but it's like the completely different expectations before they even started that date. And then also you get a girl back in your car and you're like, so when are we having sex? Like when you're on a different conversation topic is... Never, like we just spoke about the reasons why people fear for safety, and like if someone did that with any of my friends in a car, I'd be like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Even like the social etiquette is just non-existent there.
Completely.
Yeah, completely.
But also the lack of understanding that like most women, like there are definitely some women who'd be happy to do that, but they'd have brought it up in conversation. There'd be an indication. There clearly wasn't there. Like that's just like throwing that in there.
No, completely different.
People do meet for walks. I did some research. Loads of people meet for walks. That's really normal.
So the like I have another story, very very different by comparison. So it's another walk, completely normal. So they were out on a date. And the respondent, I'm such a researcher, the respondent, the person who contacted us said, I went on a date with somebody and he spent the entire conversation talking about himself from the start of Dunleary Pier back to the Dart station. So these are all very localised. These aren't the same people. And he didn't ask me a single thing about myself. He seemed completely normal online and did seem interested in me. And I texted him afterwards and said I didn't feel like there was a spark and wished him well because I just knew that I didn't have the time to fix a selfish person.
Yeah, that person's never going to be someone who asks question is interested in somebody else.
That's just a lot of work from the first date.
Dear God, I've heard so many women talk about this, and some men, like it does happen sometimes to men too, but so many women talk about this. And there's been women who videoed their dates where they're waiting for the guy to ask a question and he just does not. It's quite incredible.
They're filming them.
Yeah, they're filming under the table to go, like, this is unbelievable. Why is this person not asking me a single question? I've been here for 2 hours.
No ethics.
It's not research.
Yeah, but still, it's not like
not
normal behaviour. I'm like, if someone recorded, we would
they're providing the
consent.
tea on Facebook. It's fine.
Yeah, sure. Okay. There is that Facebook group as well.
Yeah, I'd love to see some research on that. Are we dating the same guy?
Are we dating the same guy? Yeah. Like I've had friends posting that, and it seems like such a clever concept. But I've had friends post in that about guys, and they've had the siblings. Like particularly the story I'm thinking of is she had a sister contact her of that guy really angrily. And the irony is that's the whole purpose of that group.
I know. That's why she's in there.
You can go back in and say, no, that's my brother. Like, he's grand. He's sound. Don't worry about it. As opposed to just like attacking that person. That's a
But also,
problematic
just because
group.
he's your brother doesn't mean he's not cheating on people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. The book, those pages can be really useful. Like gossip is talked about really badly a lot, but women have used gossip to save themselves from predatory men a lot. Like that is one of the functions of gossip. But those pages can be used for that, but they can also, of course, be used by people who are bearing a grudge or want to, smear somebody's reputation or something like that.
Especially if they're anonymous.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Back to disinhibition. But like, I still think they're it's a very clever tool.
It is. Yeah. So we looked at the positive stuff in the first episode. We looked at the negative stuff in this episode. There's a lot of the problems that we have offline get replicated online, unsurprisingly, and sometimes in more heightened ways because of online disinhibition. It makes people more likely to say things out loud that they might keep in their head offline. It is problematic, and you see it everywhere, not just online dating, unfortunately. I am going to talk more in the episodes on trolling and harassment about why people are doing this, so do tune in for that. That's a couple of weeks away. But in the meantime, you can find us from now on every second Tuesday because that is sustainable for us. So every second Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also find us on social media. We are on TikTok and YouTube and Blue Sky and Instagram at InBits Podcast. I'm really bad at that. I keep forgetting them. I can never remember where we are.
I'm like waiting to see do you make a mistake.
Wait for the gap. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this darkness today. We promise to try and bring you something a bit more positive next. This episode was produced and edited by Owen Hurley. And thank you to Owen for our fantastic music as well. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, we'll keep it happy next time. See you soon.